have you been following what's been happening here in Washington? It's been portrayed as chaos and some of the worst, qualities of the Republican extremism on display, with Kevin McCarthy, the California Republican, who is endorsed by Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene, but is generally attacked by the sort of MAGA wing Freedom Caucus of the Republican Party, failing to gain the speakership after 11 votes, but it now appears that there has been a deal. What are your thoughts?
Well, maybe I'm missing something, but I love it because
Yeah.
even if, of course, I agree with the substance of a lot of what these Republicans are asking for, although not all of it, I have to say, which we can talk about, but still the act of using their political leverage to extract concessions, that's exactly what, of course, was demanded of progressives back during First the Vote, with Jimmy Dore leading the way. And progressives refuse to use their leverage for anything. And by the way, there's been a lot of confusion about that by people who want to force the vote. Yes, Jimmy Dore's ask and many other people's ask was for a floor vote for Medicare for all. But that wasn't the only request. Many people put forward requests for different kinds of things that could advance a somewhat progressive agenda. And Jimmy Dore was among those saying, just use your leverage for something. If it's not like for Medicare for all, use it for something, get something, $15 minimum wage, whatever it is. And they refused. And now I think those progressives are being humiliated by these far-right Republicans who are using their leverage to extract concessions, and to such a degree that they're refusing to cave even when McCarthy has given them some stuff. When McCarthy has given them, that they're still holding out. But that appears to have succeeded. And, as we're recording this, things could change. But as of right now, there's supposed to be another vote tonight. And the talk is that finally McCarthy's won enough people by giving up enough concessions, because these hard-right Republicans kept holding out. And among the concessions are things, of course, I loathe. Like apparently they want to cut food stamps or something like that. So, of course, if that's true, then I bitterly oppose that. But apparently also they've won, or they're seeking a cut in military spending, a $75 billion cut in military spending, which, if that goes through, would be one of the most substantial cuts in Pentagon spending ever, as I understand it. And they're also seeking things like more transparency for votes. So not dumping votes at the last second, and not like filling bills with, just dozens and dozens of pages of text that no one's ever going to read. So make it a more transparent process. And so how could I oppose that?
Yeah. I mean, here's a tweet from Bloomberg about the $75 billion cut in defense spending, which is remarkable, but I'm not necessarily as interested in what this coalition of Republicans is demanding of Kevin McCarthy. It's the fact that they're holding back their votes to get what they want, and actually representing their constituents and being actual populists and using the levers of democracy to the extent that they still exist. It's the fact that they're doing that and they're winning, they're getting what they want, that interests me first and foremost. And we will get into the details of what all of this means for policy, for spending, for Ukraine aid. But that's what's significant. Why? Because it never happened. It never happened on the Democratic side when the warmongering Wall Street tool Nancy Pelosi was running for the speakership. Now let's just watch what Matt Gaetz, who's leading the charge against McCarthy, had to say.
Humble to a fault, maybe the right person for the job of Speaker of the House isn't someone who wants it so bad. Maybe the right person for the job of Speaker of the House isn't someone who has sold shares of themselves for more than a decade to get it. Maybe Jim Jordan is the right person for Speaker of the House because he is not beholden to the lobbyists and special interests who have corrupted this place and corrupted this nation under the leadership of both Republicans and Democrats. Maybe Jim Jordan would be the right person for Speaker of the House because he wouldn't fight us when we try to get a term limits bill on the floor. Maybe Jim Jordan would be the right person because he wouldn't fight us when we try to put a balanced budget on the floor and vote for it. And maybe Jim Jordan is the right person because he would endorse the plan that was built by the Texas delegation to finally secure our border. Mr. Jordan said in his nomination that there are certain bills that
Well, you get the point. And Jim Jordan is not going to accept any nomination. I mean, he's not in the running. But that was significant. He's essentially calling both parties corrupt and calling out the power of lobbyists. I think that was Steve Cohen glowering behind Matt Gaetz from the Democratic side. But we never saw this from the squad. We never saw it. And they seem to have more popular support, at least from their own constituents, for a maneuver like that, especially if it came to defense spending. Or what did AOC, how did she launch her campaign against Crowley? Abolishing ICE. So, reducing spending on the security state. They had a constituency for that and they abandoned it. Why?
Yeah, and they would maybe say what Matt Gaetz said about both parties being corrupt to their own supporters, like in rallies or in their own social media videos. But I can't imagine them saying that on the House floor. So for him to get up on the House floor and say that both parties are corrupt and controlled by lobbyists, I hate to say it, but I just don't see that kind of clarity coming from the progressive side, at least when they are in Congress. Now, sometimes when they need votes and have to appeal to progressives, they'll say stuff like that. But it just, as someone who identifies as progressive, it's pretty frustrating to see these far right Republicans being the ones willing to, hold out for a cut to military spending. That blows my mind. $75 billion, if that goes through, and this isn't just circus, which it could be. I mean, some of this could just be performance and they don't actually intend on achieving these kinds of asks. But if that's true, that's a huge indictment of progressives, that such a huge ask like that and such a major act of progress, which is cutting the military budget and to the tune of $75 billion, would come from the far right.
Yeah. And, here's a point that I made. I mean, Matt Gaetz, he's never going to be well liked in Washington. He's just generally seen as a figure of contempt. Says the media sees him as kind of a joke. Lauren Boebert, all of these figures are hated in Washington. But, when you come in as AOC, you have the chance to be a celebrity. I mean, they say politics is show business for ugly people. But if you're like relatively kind of not an ugly person, the sky's the limit. And here's what happened with this was the result. You get the cover of Rolling Stone with Nancy Pelosi if you support a Wall Street warmonger after running as a socialist along with Ilhan Omar. I mean, that's amazing. Ilhan Omar was even more strongly anti-war in her presentation when she came in. But, if you do that, you can't be a celebrity influencer. And you're not going to be wealthy when you leave politics. Or in AOC's case, it seems like she wants to be senator or governor or even run for president in 2028. The first millennial Instagram live candidate. And the Republicans just don't have that.
On top of the fact that Nancy Pelosi stands for everything that progressives oppose, there's also the fact that Nancy Pelosi has tried to, undermine progressive candidates like AOC and Ilhan Omar, but yet there they are posing with her for the cover of a magazine. And I wonder what the most good faith interpretation of that decision is. Like, they think that doing that they'll ingratiate themselves with Nancy Pelosi, and that will open up some space for them to get through some genuinely progressive measures. I mean, I imagine that's what the thinking is, but if that's the case, I just haven't seen any proof of that. I haven't seen any kind of leeway given to progressives in there. I haven't seen what the result has been, but I'd love to hear someone make the case. Like, what has been the tangible result of playing nice with Nancy Pelosi from a progressive point of view? I'd love to hear someone make that case. I'm not capable of making it, but someone must have it, and I'd love to hear what that is.
I think that was the tangible result.
Cover yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that's probably what it is. Yeah,
I mean, I know how I don't cover Congress. I don't cover the Hill. I live near the Hill, like not far from the Hill, so I go up there and hear what people are saying. And I know how the media works. And if you want to be liked in this town, Pelosi, I mean, people outside of this town hate her, but she is pretty well liked by the media here and respected. And she has this very strong, a very powerful network. And so to be part of that at the beginning of your career is to pretty much guarantee longevity in Washington. And AOC came in as an outsider, and she wasn't liked initially by a lot of her colleagues. I mean, they considered her sort of dangerous and ridiculous and a threat. I mean, she was campaigning as a socialist, and now that's sort of changed. And, you see it when I used to be allowed in the Capitol. I would see it when she would come into a committee hearing. She was sort of like a star of the party, and the media would surround her, and she was taken very seriously. Pelosi can shiv you too. I mean, she could really screw you over. So that's what it's about. And the Republicans, I mean, it's being portrayed. I mean, I was watching Anderson Cooper last night, just passing by a TV, because that's the only way I'm ever going to watch Anderson Cooper. It's like if you're in an airport, or it's like,
oh yeah,
and
captive audience.
Captive, exactly. CNN is like the captive audience news network. And his correspondent was saying, our enemies are watching us and wondering what kind of unity this country has and what kind of stability we have after the speaker has failed to get nominated after 11 votes. And he's basically saying that we need to be less democratic and have less democracy because of Russia and China, that we need to be less democratic for Putin and Xi. That's a democratic and centrist or establishment talking point about what's happening here. But what I see, as you said in your initial reaction, Aaron, is a rare glimmer of democratic deliberation.
Yeah. And look, on that point about our enemies, our so-called enemies, like without fail, anytime there's anything that is perceived to threaten the establishment in some way, the argument is always that this will help Russia. So I don't know if you saw this recently, but there was that British politician who was talking about striking nurses who wanted better wages and better conditions. And he said that we have to send a message to Vladimir Putin right now. And this is undermining that. So nurses seeking better pay is helping Vladimir Putin, according to this politician.
I forget his name. That same whack job said that about the potential rail strike, that Putin was encouraging that. I brought it up actually at our when we were at Collision in Toronto on stage, and I learned that British parliamentarian is actually a member of the 77th Brigade, which is the propaganda division of the British Army. I'm also looking for a Michael McFaul tweet. I'm not finding it right now, where he basically said that debating Ukraine aid is something that cannot happen in Washington. It's an unacceptable display of division, and we need to have total unity on it. Essentially, those debates are not allowed. And there have been debates actually within the context of Kevin McCarthy's nomination on these issues. Let me show some footage of that, and the response by the Democrat to Matt Gaetz, the Democrat Steve Cohen of Tennessee, is really interesting here.
President Trump, I believe, is the first president in my lifetime that didn't start any new wars. This is an issue that I know unites some elements of the right and left for the benefit of our communities.
Will the House be in order?
He got really
President Trump, I
upset
believe,
there.
is.
I mean, what was he saying, Aaron?
So that's Steve Cohen, and he says to Gaetz, he says something that like Trump tried to start a war inside our own government with January 6th, which, by the way, happy anniversary to everybody if you're celebrating.
Yeah, happy January 6th, everybody. It was just like, it was worse than Iraq. It was just like killing 1 million Iraqis, according to Steve Cohen. They almost did it too. It was like these low IQ rioters who are like being duped or like just led into their own political suicide. They almost took over the government with they had high level support within the Pentagon. Trust me. It was really bad. No, but I mean, that's what Steve Cohen is saying. He started a war within our government. Yeah. What does he even mean?
With a 3-hour riot led by the QAnon shaman. That's what he means. Yeah. But look, this is a talking point that Trump supporters will use, and there is some truth to it. It's true, Trump didn't start any new wars. You compare that to compare his record to Obama, for example. Libya, the dirty war in Syria, the surge in Afghanistan. But at the same time, it's not as if Trump didn't. I think Trump tried to start a war in Iran when he assassinated Qasem Soleimani.
Well,
And
he caved to elements that wanted to do that,
yeah,
specifically Mike Pompeo and Benjamin Netanyahu, who were just working on him.
and if you ask Venezuelans, I mean, he certainly he escalated an economic war against them by trying to overthrow their government and imposing sanctions. So that's the part that I think that talking point from pro-Trumpers misses. But yeah, again, at the same time, imagine a progressive in Congress right now talking about how we shouldn't have a president who starts wars. I mean, that just wouldn't happen now because progressives right now are for proxy wars, especially the ones in Ukraine. The one in Ukraine.
I just think it's significant that he said that something that the left and right support for the betterment of our communities. You also don't hear that kind of rhetoric
Yeah.
from the House progressives. You saw Ilhan Omar and AOC get heckled over their vote on two Ukraine aid packages, 40 billion and I think 45 billion, and they got heckled. And how do they respond? They call their hecklers Putin puppets and call them right wingers, and they attack them instead of saying, "Hey, you're right. Let's all come together. Let's bring people together across class, racial, and partisan lines against this war that's sucking money out of our communities into the pockets of Ukrainian warlords and the U.S. arms industry." Like, why is that so hard to do? But they couldn't do it. They sounded like McCarthyites.
Yeah, they can't do it because they've been completely co-opted, and still there's been multiple votes now for the Ukraine proxy war. There just was another one, and it's been pretty much unanimous. For the first time, Rashida Tlaib voted present, and AOC voted no. But AOC explained in a statement that it had nothing to do with Ukraine; it had to do with some border funding, some law enforcement funding on the border, which she campaigned against. So she voted against it because it was a part of a bigger. But so still no opposition yet from progressives, including Bernie Sanders, to this proxy war. The official price tag is over $105 billion now, at least.
Well, the House MAGA coalition has made a big deal about Ukraine aid. They've called to cut it off. And initially, and then we saw Marjorie Taylor Greene call to audit all military aid to Ukraine to determine where it's going and whether it's actually reaching the destination it's intended for. And Defense News, which is a publication that's very close to the arms industry. It's kind of like a Pentagon and arms industry trade publication. I mean, you look above this headline and they're advertising some big arms industry conference. McCarthy's troubled speaker bid raises questions about Ukraine. Many Republicans, as we know, support the Ukraine proxy war. Their views are represented every night by Sean Hannity or Ali North. The George W. Bush Republicans are heavily supportive of this. And Kevin McCarthy has resisted efforts to audit the aid, but he said, we won't give you a blank check. Then he rescinded those comments. He said that in November, he rescinded them in December. And so you have like the industry's fretting here. The regime is fretting about McCarthy actually making more concessions or failing entirely. And if you look at the alternatives that are being put up, who don't seem to have any chance, these are people who voted against the supplementals for Ukraine aid. Jim Jordan, who's not going to accept the nomination, is one of them, voted against the supplementals. So I think whatever happens here, you're going to see increased pressure on congressional leadership to start tamping down on these massive aid packages to Ukraine.
And maybe one or two progressives could join them. Like maybe just one or two. Is there anybody who calls himself a progressive, like Barbara Lee, who was the only lawmaker to vote against the AUMF to authorize endless war after 9/11? Maybe she could remember what made her famous for her principled stance. And
did you see her at Zelensky's speech?
I missed that. No.
She was sitting front and center with a blue and yellow dress on, a Ukraine flag themed dress. Whereas the squad didn't go. They didn't even participate. And over 80 Republicans did not go to Zelensky's address. I found that more offensive than the QAnon shaman standing there personally, but that's just me. I mean, the QAnon shaman wasn't asking me for anything. But yeah.
He was only asking, by the way, he was only asking for vegan meals after he got locked up in a cage for like, because you know, all these January 6th rioters got locked up in like indefinite detention for a long time, or at least some of them did. So the QAnon shaman's ask was for vegan meals.
Yeah,
that was his
at
ask.
least give him a plant burger for all the entertainment he brought us.